It's April 2016. Welcome to Needlessly Complicated, a bi-weekly podcast in which the hosts Yasha and Felix give a rational angle to generally polarizing topics and give you space to discuss and exchange ideas. This week, are you racist, sexist, and xenophobic?
In the last episode, we looked at the types of, or more like general freedom of speech and how government censorship can affect it. But we have avoided a topic which we are going to discuss this time, and it's the social censorship, a phenomenon that we can see in the West rising, or actually it's already in the full swing. And I think it's even more important and more scary what is happening on the level of social censorship when people self-censor and don't allow others to speak without any government.
If you read stuff like 1984, there is an element of social censorship, but usually it's still from the government. Usually the government is kind of conditioning people to censor debates and censor topics, but somehow in Western societies now this is going on without major interference of the government. People just somehow develop this attitude themselves.
Right, and I think it's actually pretty interesting that how in the movies or even books that describe these dystopian societies where freedom of speech doesn't exist anymore, it's almost always the government and the social censorship that derives from government control. But what we have seen recently in the West is actually just people doing this. And this is, I don't know what it's due to, but this is something that arises with the whole social justice warrior notion and how we can't hurt people and these minorities. And we are going to discuss this because I think it's important for people to know that most of the things that the social justice warriors say is just nonsense.
And somehow this all comes from universities. From what I've gathered, and I'm not too well informed on what has been happening especially in my younger years, but from what I've gathered is that professors in gender studies classes and social sciences kind of started this years ago, and then it failed. But they still kept their positions in the universities and then ended up creating this whole culture around it, which now is in full swing and has a grip on young people at universities, which is the most scary thing of this whole movement, I think, that young people are being misled in universities.
Right, and what you've just alluded to in the previous point, that there was this social justice motion before, but I think it came with the second wave feminism, and there were people that were radical even then. It just nobody took them seriously, so they kind of went away, but they, as you just said, stayed in power. And the problem is that now it's got control of the people, press, politics, and police, so the four Ps, and now it has the highest power that it ever had.
The good thing about it is, though, that people are now waking up to the fact that this is wrong. There are way more people now that speak out against it than there were just 1 or 2 years ago. So even though it's at its highest form, there is resistance to it. So I think there's some hope. because of people to open up the debate about this kind of nonsense.
Right, and I think the people started to resist recently due to the traits of social justice warriors, how they behave and what policies they want, how they want to censor people, and in particular, this includes this whole notion of phobias and this ableism and other ism. You can bring up a lot of examples, and this is not something people can ascribe to, because this is really collective.
The central feature of social justice, in a sense, is to make people feel guilty, and that's what people don't like. Most of the citizens running around in Western societies are not bad people, but somehow social justice and the social censorship is trying to make them feel bad for just being normal citizens. And I think that's where they really went wrong. Because if you call people all these things, Islamophobe and homophobe, ableist, fetist, all this nonsense, and you make people feel as if they were constantly doing something wrong, even though they are trying their best, and you kind of lose. And that's the best point of attack against this nonsense.
And this is also an attack against individualism, because once you get a whole group labeled as sexist or racist, and you work from that point, or you have the minorities that you just say they are victims, the whole policy that you will propose, or just the way that you will act with other people, will no longer take an individual or the individual into account. It will be always, oh, you're a white cis male, then okay, you are the worst thing that happened to the world, because 200 years ago, colonialism, and that's it.
Yeah,
which doesn't make sense, because you are not you can't be personally responsible for something that happened 200 years ago when you were not alive. Neither were your parents or even your grandparents.
They are trying to paint everybody in some kind of box, and yeah, this collectivism is really scary. So we alluded to some of the crazier notions they have, especially this whole concept is somehow built on this notion of privilege and offending people. So somehow they, in their social justice courses in university, which are actually called social justice courses, just straight out, they are taught that all this oppression and privilege has to do with some kind of power structures within systems, political systems and societal systems, that lead to some minorities being systematically oppressed. And that's their core feature, and where all these terms are derived from. If you're, for example, an ableist, then you are part of a system that oppresses people because they are not able to do something. And that core notion is so crazy.
Yeah, let's get this straight. The field you're working in, or company, it's essential that they demand that you are good at that particular thing, that you can't be seriously thinking that you should get a job and get paid for because you're a nice person.
Yes, so the core idea of ableist is completely crazy, but then again, the whole ideology behind it is also kind of crazy, because they are assuming there's a big systematic conspiracy going on that puts these types of oppression in place. They are assuming there's actually a system that targets people who can't do stuff and excludes them from certain activities, which is on one end true, because you have to be able to do stuff to actually achieve it. So it's a natural necessity almost, but they paint this completely natural behavior into a corner to make people feel bad.
Isn't this a backlash against meritocracy? I mean, if people are no longer judged by their merits, then you can easily say that, okay, that the fact that I have a problem in my life, that I can't find a job, I can't, although here I should mention that many, if not most of these social justice warriors are not poor people, actually. They are some kids from rich to middle class families that had never to work or do anything. They just feel that they have to give something to other people, but not themselves. They won't go out on the street and start giving money to people. They want the whole population to distribute wealth and distribute social power to some groups that they feel are marginalized.
And also, while this is certainly a good point, it's also a generation which doesn't know about real problems, right? You and me are part of this generation which grew up in the most peaceful and easy times to grow up in. Of course, every country and every individual has their own problems, but the problems we face nowadays are so little that just people start worrying about emotional stuff that really doesn't hit anywhere close to home as other problems in the past. Imagine the generation that fought in World War I and II. They had real issues to care about. Imagine the people who fought against segregation. They had real issues. But these people, their main issue is that maybe somebody is spreading his legs in a subway, and that's the huge oppression by men against women, and that's what they're fighting to. They're completely out of touch with the real reality.
Right. It's even called mansplaining, or is it the other one?
Mansplaining is when...
Or mansplaining is when a man explains something to a woman in a way that is considered rude or something, patronizing.
Yeah. And then manspreading is when a man spreads out in the subway because he tries to sit comfortably because of his anatomy. But no, that's bad, obviously.
That's obviously not biology. Come on, that can't be the case. So what you just raised, that point is very important one, and I think this is why it results in these trigger warnings, safe spaces. It's people trying to defend their emotional bubble because they don't actually have any problems in real world, so they have to create ones, manufacture these artificial problems. And their hurt feelings will be the number one problem in the world. And it's taken to such extreme that, for example, there was this case when Christina Hoff Sommers, and for people who don't know who she is, she's actually a feminist, but a reasonable one, who was part of the second wave feminism. And when she looked at what feminists are doing right now, the third wave feminists, she can't ascribe to this because it's just nonsense. So she went to a university to give a lecture about this issue. And because she disagreed with their particular type of feminism, their brand, the students were so triggered that they had to be escorted to a safe space where there was a therapy dog, and they were watching puppy videos with some calm music.
Yeah, I mean, if that's not not psychopathic, but psychological signs that something is going wrong, then probably nothing is. And they even claim that she triggered the actual therapy dog. I don't know how you trigger a dog except for maybe taking away his bone. He's probably triggered then, but how do you trigger a being that doesn't even speak our language? It's such nonsense. And all because she disagreed with them. And that's the central feature really, because they are so safe in a way. And you said they make up these problems. I don't think they make them up, but the human mind has a tendency to always relativize everything. And if there are no problems, then suddenly small problems become big problems because there's no reference to real big problems if you grow up in this safe society. And then you start acting like a complete moron and go play with dogs when somebody disagrees with you. It's quite crazy. And there are really people who bring this to a whole different level because they are literally triggered by everything. And let me just play you a clip here by an overweight woman who is triggered by literally everything because of her body.
It's really hard being triggered all the time. And I'm not kidding. It's all the time for me at this point. I get dressed in the morning, I'm triggered. I take a shower, I'm triggered. I get in the car, I'm triggered. I go for a walk, I'm triggered. I leave my house, I'm triggered. I sit in my room all day, I'm triggered. I look at my thin, beautiful sisters and I'm triggered, and I just can't get away from it.
So she can't get away from it. I mean, this is a cry for help. And I don't think that social justice warriors who would agree with her saying, oh yes, we have to stop these thin people oppressing you because of your body, are doing her any good. I think they are actually harming this person, because this person clearly needs to go to some kind of therapist or person that talks to her and puts her in check with reality.
Right. I mean, this is crazy, and I think we should actually explain where these trigger warnings come from, or what is this notion of being triggered means at all. Because trigger warnings, if I understand it correctly, essentially were in really narrow situations. For example, giving a lecture about rape in a law university, and then the trigger warnings were there to warn the people who may have experienced rape, so they could prepare themselves essentially, or not be in that lecture, because it would bring up such memories, such vivid experience that it would be really harmful to them. What happened essentially is that social justice warriors took this notion and started applying it to everything. And I do mean everything, because as we have just heard on that video, that this woman is triggered by everything because they don't really have any problems. So they create this bubble that consisting of their feelings that they don't want to be hurt.
And as I said earlier, if you allow people to do that, even if you have a rape victim which is faced with the notion of rape in some lecture, the way to deal with these kinds of traumas is not to hide away in a bubble. The way to deal with the fact that you're overweight and that you're not happy with that is not to hide away in a closet and avoid every thin person. The way to deal with that is to go out and see the world how it is, and come to terms with yourself and either accept how you self feel and how you look, or make a change because you're unhappy. Just hiding behind a wall is not going to do any good at all.
Right. And again, I wouldn't advocate people to hate others because they are fat. That's just, again, that would be disgusting. But what I can't support at all is when people, instead of dealing with their problems, force society to to change itself. For example, normalize being overweight, and normalizing this health issue essentially is again really harmful, because people will just think, oh, okay, I can be fat, that there is no problem. And if anybody says anything about me, then he's a fattest. He's just an evil human being that doesn't deserve my opinion anyway. So, but the problem is that it is a health issue, so it's really harmful to do this.
Yes, this whole notion of social justice just seems to inflict more harm than good. Just take smoking for a moment. We are now at the notion that you can be an ableist and a fattest, but the next step is to be a smokist. Don't put warnings that smoking causes cancer on a pack of cigarettes, because, the people who smoke can't help themselves, They just like it so much that they do it. It's just how they are, and you can't discriminate them because of that. So health warnings about how bad smoking is for your health are just smokers, If you get to that point, then we are bringing it to such an extreme that we are almost directly inflicting harm to the bigger society.
Right, and I think it's actually a great irony is that these social justice warriors are the ones who are discriminating, because they're saying that because once you have been labeled by something, you have been labeled black or homosexual or fat or something, you can't change. And not only you can't change, but everything you say, everything you do is only due to that label, only due to that group that they put you in. And this is something that actually thrives, or even not only thrives, that's the result of their ideology, because their whole ideology rests on the notion that some people are privileged and some are oppressed. So they create this identity politics in which, for example, a white heterosexual male is the least oppressed, and actually he is the oppressor, even though that it will not take the individual into account by any means. But since he's part of that group that he can't change, he's an oppressor, a privileged one, and a black woman will be always oppressed, even if she is, as an individual, a remarkable success story, because she's a millionaire who worked her way through society and made something out of herself. No, that will still be true, that all black people are oppressed. So it creates this, actually, they create this sexism and racism against every other person.
And in a way, they also create a situation in which they can be the big patron who comes and help out these people. That's one thing that I find really disturbing as well, that yes, young people generally have a tendency to become activists, especially in their university years. A lot of young people are in activism for something, and since there's nothing there, they create these power structures and label blacks as people who need help, and then they can help them. Then there's a situation where they can help others, even though the way they are doing it is not sensical at all.
But this is actually something that happens even if we don't take this identity politics into account. The whole virtue signaling now is pretty spread. People, for example, when there is a terrorist attack happens in some country, what people do? The first thing they do is they change their Facebook profile picture to include that flag, and okay, I'm such a nice guy because I feel sorry for other people. But did they do anything of value? Did they help anybody with that? No, they didn't do anything. It just they feel better about themselves because they signal to everybody that they are so good, such kind people.
I mean, they are doing something, and that's raising awareness. The problem is that the second step never follows because they are satisfied with what they've done and then just stop. I think changing your profile picture to the country's flag is not necessarily doing that much, but it raises awareness at least. However, if you don't follow it up with any sort of actual help to the people, then you're clearly not doing anything. And because it's so easy to get satisfaction out of this virtue signaling, I think that's the reason we see, especially in the Black Lives Matter protests, we see quite a lot of white males who are in the crowd chanting Black Lives Matter and who are going up against other white males and saying, oh, you don't know how black people feel, and are supporting this ideology because white males are painted in this corner, and that's an easy out for them. They can signal, oh, I care for black people, therefore I'm not one of the bad white males, I'm one of the good guys here. And incidentally, a lot of these people are not really the strong personalities. A lot of them hide in the crowd and are kind of tiny, thin men who are a bit nerdy a lot of the times, and that's really, really worrying that they use this kind of virtue signaling and just jump on the bandwagon of some weird ideology.
Right, and it's totally supported by mainstream media again. You can't actually, if you try to argue with these people, it's not only useless because they are not irrational thinkers. They are just arguing always from their feelings. If you don't agree with them, you will be called racist or sexist or xenophobe, whatever. But they will never address your arguments, which may rest on factual evidence. For example, if you say that there is this whole meme that the women in America are making only 0.84
77 cents to the dollar.
77 cents for each dollar that a male makes. So what does it scream? Of course it screams patriarchy, oppression of women. But then when economists say that, okay, you are not representing the world correctly because what these statistics don't include is the actual wages, because it's just the total earning that men versus women made, but it doesn't take into account the different lifestyle choices women prefer, or when they have kids and they have to leave work. Of course, that should be shown in the overall wages, overall earnings. But if you take the same job and look at the same hours they work, then it will be, you can see that the earnings are not actually better for men. It's equal. So by the end, by the time you say this, you will be called sexist 100 times, and nobody will actually listen to what you said.
And you can never forget that also, if you do that, and you are a male, for example, you don't understand the problems women face. Because if we use that logic and somebody asks you, if it's sunny outside, then technically you would have to say, sorry, I'm not a weatherman, I can't comment on that. But that's the logic they use. There's this pyramid of oppression, and wherever you fall on that pyramid, that's how much your opinion is worth. So if you're a black, disabled, transgender woman who is fat and escaped from Syria, then you can say anything and it's worth so much more than a white male who lives in Silicon Valley and owns a company, even though that man might have some understanding of economy. But because he's so privileged in their eyes, he's not allowed to say anything.
Right, and we actually have a great example where people demonstrate this, that giving your opinion, if you are oppressed, gives so much more value. And if you are the privileged one, then it's worthless.
Are you a white man? If you're a white man, then shut the fuck up about race, because you don't know shit other than how to rape and kill.
So if you are a white man, you only know how to rape and kill. I mean, if that's not an insult, then...
Right, and if you call that person racist, then no, you can't do that, because first of all, they will call it reverse racism, and secondly, it will be said that there is no such thing. So you can't actually defend your point. You can't argue with such people, because they will just label you something, and then either you are a part of this oppressed group, and then they will listen to you even if you are speaking total nonsense, or not. So again, in reality, these are the people who are racist, and not the ones that try to use some arguments.
See, but the whole ideology creates a situation in which they are right by default. The whole notion of racism, for example, rests on the idea that real racism is somehow a systematic form of oppression that comes from a place of power. So then, if you take that definition, of course, a guy who has more money, who belongs to the supposedly privileged group, of course, then he can't be racist against him. But what they are doing is playing hide the ball. Of course you can be racist against him, just not within their strange definition that they learned in some gender studies class. But these classes create a framework for them to always reinforce their values and ideology. So it's such an effective memoplex that it's really hard to fight against that.
And actually, they won't even call it racism, what you just described. They will say that you have prejudice, but you are not racist. For example, if a black person calls some white man that because he's white, then he's a rapist and murderer, and that's what all he is, then you just say no, that's prejudice.
Yes, and that's exactly what I meant with hiding the ball. Where's the difference between that? It's still utterly disgusting behavior to generalize somebody because of their race or just because of their skin color. Doesn't make it any better at all if you call it prejudice. And it sure as fuck doesn't make it right because you are oppressed in some kind of way that you can then go out and just be aggressive.
Right, and there is this great example in US with the Black Lives Matter movement, which essentially again rests on the notion that it was a reaction to cops killing black men, if I understand this correctly. And essentially what they are saying is that all cops are racist against blacks, and the shootings in which black people die is way higher, and it's just the whole America is racist. And I don't know what their end game is, because they never actually propose any policies. But they're just chanting that Black Lives Matter and everyone else is racist, and that seems their whole politics. But they have no problem with burning cop cars and attacking people. That's fine.
This weird notion of being oppressed making violence, physical, actual violence, and also verbal not verbal violence, but verbal aggression somehow justified. It's disgusting. You see the same with Donald Trump, where people are blocking the road to his rallies or go to his rallies and try to disrupt them, try to take the microphone away from him, try to charge him on the podium and take away his microphone. Or even Bernie Sanders, they climb onto the podium and take away the microphone from him. And there's no world in which that is justified. That's not how people protested back in the day when they were still fighting for good values. That's not how Martin Luther King protested against segregation. He didn't charge the White House with a bunch of angry people and try to assassinate the president. But somehow these people think that the perceived oppression against them somehow justifies very aggressive behavior.
Again, it's something that in the discussion again with the Black Lives Matter, Ben Shapiro told his the person he was arguing against that if you live in this world where you are never responsible for anything you do because you are black, then this creates an environment where people actually won't thrive. So, as we have discussed, this actually creates more harm than good.
So, I guess the natural question that comes from this is, how do we go up against this?
Well, again, because you can't actually have logical arguments and rational discussions with these people, you have to essentially argue from feelings, which they do. That's the only thing they understand. That's why it's so successful, because the voters, and not only in politics, but in society, people now don't value logical discussion, so they will look at somebody, and if they see that somebody just repeats 50 times in a row that the person A is racist or sexist or whatever, and that person A, all he does is just saying, no, I'm not racist, no, I'm not sexist, it won't help him, and he will try to argue something with actually legitimate arguments. Nobody will listen to him, because by that time he was called racist so many times that people will just believe and demonize him. So what these people do in all debates is they dehumanize and demonize people who they don't agree with. And that's the solution, I think, is that you have to argue from emotions, because that's the only thing they understand. The way is to shame your opponents who use these tactics, and say that it's really disgusting to use these demonizing tactics to silence you. And since it's just really immoral way of discussing something, you will maybe even get attention of people, because they will see that you are arguing from feelings. They can understand us, and okay, it's shameful, it's disgusting to do this. Okay, then maybe I will stop for a second, and then you can present your arguments, your rational thought processes.
That seems like a good point, because in a way that has been effective before with religious types as well, where you expose their double standards in a way, but also their moral failures within their ideology, and then you get people to think. Another way I think that is effective right now is to simply parody and ridicule these people and expose to the bigger audience how crazy the stuff they are doing is, and people like Gaetsat or Milo Yiannopoulos have been very effective with that in exposing the crazy conclusions that you would have to take from these ideologies.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you have to point out their double standards. There is no question about it. If the people ascribe to this notion that, okay, you are a man, then you can't say anything bad or defend your position on sexism because you're a man, then you have to show these double standards where you can say that, okay, this woman is talking shit and nobody tries to call her out, and that's immoral again, and because it's hypocrite to do that. I think if you show this double standard enough, then people may notice what they're doing. Again, there is another example, is the criticizing any religion is going to show to people that you're progressive because you're criticizing religion. In the West, in some countries, in US, for example, that's true. That if you do that, then people will salute you. But then if you swap any religion for Islam, then you are a racist. Then you are the worst human being that walks this earth.
So, in a way, then, you put yourself in danger every time you go up against these people, and that's one of their big tools, I think. Just being able to deplatform you and get people to feel bad about you, even get you fired. There have been instances where, for example, a famous YouTuber Thunderfoot, who speaks out against all kinds of bullshit, he does a lot of science debunking, but there have been instances where feminists send letters to his employer to get him fired. So, in a way, if you go up against them, you are putting yourself in real danger. And that's just one of these double standards, which is so disgusting, that they try to use force again and not arguments. However, I would also propose to get at the root of the problem, because this whole phenomenon stems from young people being indoctrinated with this. The generations that are or were already adult when this started happening, they don't usually tend to fall into this demographic. The people who fall into this demographic is people who have been in universities within social sciences while this whole phenomenon was strong. So maybe we have to attack the universities themselves and change their courses.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a fair point. Again, kids who are going to university before they have learned all this stuff, they can be totally normal people. And then, in the universities, they get indoctrinated with this socialist, Marxist, and social justice ideology. And after 3 to 4 or 5 years after you get out of there, of course, you were living in this bubble, in this echo chamber, where the university professors and other students were saying the same thing. It's so easy for you to become this social justice warrior and just lose your mind. It's like a religion of its own, actually.
Yes, and it stems from the fact that these people who come to universities are in a position in which they trust the professors and the coursework. They're going there to be educated. So they want to learn. They accept the stuff you present them. I mean, taking myself as an example, during my university course, I learned so much, but did I question everything? No, not necessarily, because the people who were teaching me knew so much more about the subjects. Of course, I was a bit more critical than the average student, I would think, but you still take a lot of the stuff at face value. And that is precisely the reason we have to get rid of trigger warnings and banning controversial speakers from universities, because if you create these echo chambers, then you get ideology-driven individuals that come out of our universities and have no grip on reality. However, if you get rid of trigger warnings and get rid of banning controversial speakers, then they get a full picture. We kind of have to allow people in universities to get in touch with reality much more and not live in a safe home for 4 years on a campus where they are not challenged ever.
Yeah, because when they do get out of university, they will be faced and are faced with reality, and that's what they don't like about it. They don't like that they won't get, for now at least, they won't get just randomly a very important position in a highly paid job just because they are in some group. I think that it's a really good idea what you said, but is it enough to just reintroduce freedom of speech in universities? You still will have these professors who are teaching this nonsense to students and trying to indoctrinate them and this is the problem which the whole thing stems from. So how do you deal with that?
Sargon of Akkad, another popular YouTuber, is running a petition right now to halt all social justice courses and to get universities to rethink them and rework them to apply quality standards to them. Because that, in a way, is the problem with these courses. They've just been running rampant and nobody has checked on them. They are called social sciences, and you can debate whether they are real sciences. But there should be some quality standard to them. There should be some basis in empiricism. There should be general knowledge of statistics. They should still be evidence-based if the university, in fact, paints this as a social science and paints itself as a university. So introducing quality standards and looking at these courses and reworking them might help, because in a way the university does have an interest in teaching people real stuff instead of just nonsense.
I'm not really sure about this, because essentially if you are saying that you want to close these social justice courses, aren't you kind of censoring what they can or can't teach? It's good to raise awareness for universities what is going on, but if they choose to just let this be taught, you can't ban this, right? Because that's against freedom of speech in itself.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say you need to ban it. You need to halt it and then rework it, which is exactly what this petition is aimed at. But the argument from freedom of speech, it's a university doesn't teach opinions. A university teaches the truth. They educate, and an educator has a certain goal and therefore also has certain standards. You can't teach 2 + 2 = 5 in a math class and label that as valid math in a public school. That's just not how it works. That's not a freedom of speech issue. Then you are just spreading lies and selling them for the truth to people who don't know better. So I don't think this is a freedom of speech issue in stopping universities to teach lies.
Yeah, and I actually agree with you, because if you look at for example, biology courses, if you, instead of evolution, you're teaching creationism, then what kind of doctors, medical staff are you getting from that university? It's just going it's not complying with these standards of scientific research.
Exactly. So a university has standards, and those standards should be held to any course. Of course, you can teach the theory of oppression and privilege, but not in university unless you can somehow fund it in empirical, peer-reviewed science. But please feel free to go ahead and just create your little club of social justice in the next local community center and meet there and talk about it after school. But a school is not the place to just teach anything.
But the problem is that the politics and mainstream media supports this ideology, so how can we get rid of it? I mean, not getting rid of ideology, because obviously you can't get rid of thoughts. You just can present your arguments and hope that you can persuade sensible people to think differently. But how can you just enforce these standards?
Well, I think stuff like this petition are actually a way to go forward, because then you have a thing that you can present to these universities and say, look, this many people think there's an issue here. The general public thinks you are doing something very wrong and we like you to reconsider. And in a way, it's working because some of these universities, which are just full of social justice courses and social justice students, they actually have problems now with their finances because simply not as many students are signing up for that university anymore. I think this university in Mizzou, where the whole Concerned Students 1950 or something started, they actually have financial problems now because nobody wants to study there anymore. So the way to achieve this is kind of the way we achieve any political goals, in that we get the general public to vote for them. And you as an individual may not be able to get a huge number of votes swung in a different way, but if you can even just get your neighbor to change his opinion, or your neighbor, because a lot of people don't have to change their opinions, they are just not aware of it or are just not too interested in it. If you just get your neighbor interested, and your neighbor gets his wife and the police officer from across the street interested, and those two get 3 other people interested, then you're doing a good thing already. So in a way, what we are doing here and what many people across the internet and in the public space are doing, just highlighting these problems and highlighting that there's a need for the public to come together and make a change, that is the way to achieve all this, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And this is just great that so many people started talking about this. Also, there was this incident a few years ago with Gamergate, that feminists were attacking gamers because of the games they're playing and creating, that they are all sexist. And it's not a really super interesting topic, but what I gather from the incident is something very powerful, and that is that the moment that people stood up for themselves, these social justice warriors didn't know what is happening, because they were so accustomed to people just give in because they are afraid of being labeled something, because it has real world consequences. They can lose their jobs, they can lose their friends. It has real consequences. So when people stood up for themselves and said that, okay, no, you can't make me always follow your nonsense ideology, they didn't have any power. Because these are just words. They can't use actual life-threatening tactics, methods to force you to do anything. So if people start to speak up and stand up for themselves, then I think this problem will slowly but surely go away.
Definitely. So the thing that you see with this, of course, is the old phenomenon that as long as only your neighbors are getting arrested and shot in the night, then it's all fine and fun and games. But as soon as there's a chance that the evil fascist government comes to your door at night and tries to arrest you, then you suddenly start speaking up. So the key is to get people emotionally and personally invested in this, to show how this isn't a phenomenon that's far away. A lot of people in Central Europe like to think that, oh, this is an issue in the UK and America mostly. But no, it's coming over here, and even you can be labeled as a racist and bigot for no reason, and people will write letters to your employer if they don't agree with your political views, and they will try to get you fired. They will try to get your friends to leave you alone. So that's the key, to show people that it can affect themselves, and then get a consensus in the public and get people to fight back against all this nonsense. And I think that's a quite hopeful way to end this episode as well.
Yeah, I agree. And again, I just want to emphasize that people should speak up about this. They shouldn't be afraid, because if everybody's doing that, you can't fire everybody from them jobs or imprison the whole population if the whole population or majority has this opinion. So we are looking forward to seeing social justice ideology going away.
The only way we can achieve that is if every one of you just does their little bit. Just try to convince one person at your school, at your workplace, maybe try to get a few more people involved in it. But even if you get one person, that person could convince another person, and then from there we can build this. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you care about these issues, then go over to our subreddit as /r/needlessly-complicated, or our Twitters @reasonphilic for Felix and @Yashoka for Yasha, and discuss this issue. Get it out there, get people involved so we can make a real change. If you want to help the podcast grow, please write us a review on iTunes or share it with your friends. You can do that on Facebook, or in person, or via other social media, but definitely tell your friends about it. Thank you so much for your support, and see you in our next episode.